And I'm going to give a national perspective on school funding in Michigan, how Michigan stacks up compared to the rest of the country. On the a very surface level view, and this chart gives kind of a historical view of how much our schools spend. And the 2007 data for the $11,337 per pupil that K-12 schools spend. Nationally, that ranks about 15th in the country based on the latest data that's available through the National Center for Education Statistics. But making those kind of state comparisons like that is difficult. It's problematic in many ways because states vary by population and they vary by wealth. For instance, Alaska is not as populated as other states, but has a large tax base, so their per pupil funding is very high. Other states like New Jersey and New York and Connecticut have large per pupil spending amounts and revenue amounts because they're very wealthy states. States like Utah, which have a lot of school-age children per capita, have a low per pupil spending amount because of that. So in order to kind of get around that and get a better picture of how states compare, we do a couple different things. And one is to use percentages, how much of state budgets go to schools, go towards education. And then also we factor in for different levels of state wealth using common indicators. So when we do that, this first looking at percentages of government budgets that go to K-12 schools, Michigan ranks second in the country behind Texas in the percentage of state spending that goes towards the K-12 public school system. Now this data also has a small shortcoming in that states fund their schools in different ways. Michigan happens to fund their school largely through state-based revenue sources. And so states that use more local revenue wouldn't appear as high on this particular chart. So to control for that, there's data that includes both state and local government expenditures for K-12 education. And the latest data that's available through this U.S. Census Bureau shows that Michigan is third in the country by that measure. About 40% of what our local and state governments spend goes to public education. Looking at the state wealth factors and controlling for those, two common factors that are used to determine state wealth are state gross domestic product and personal income. This chart, again from the National Center for Educational Statistics, shows that Michigan ranks fourth in K-12 expenditures per $10 of state gross domestic product. Again, this is the latest data that's available from 2007. When you look at the personal income level in Michigan and use that, control for that, and compare us to the rest of the country, state and local revenue for public schools per $1,000 of personal income, Michigan ranks third in the country. So this is essentially controlling for these different levels of wealth amongst the states, where some states could afford to spend more on K-12 schools than others. This gets around that issue. And not surprisingly, when you look at the compensation that we provide for school employees, particularly teachers, when you use the same kind of measure, Michigan comes out on top in the entire country. From 2003 to 2009, when you take the average teacher salary in the state relative to the per capita personal income in the state, Michigan ranks #1 in the country for these 7 years. And this is actually not a recent phenomenon. The Citizens Research Council of Michigan did the same analysis in 1996, and Michigan was ranked #1 then as well. Now, with all of that, the bad news from my perspective is that academically we don't rank up nearly as high compared to the rest of the states. And I think what the Michigan Department of Education is doing by changing the MME and MEP cut scores is a recognition of this fact. that compared to the rest of the country, our students are not performing as well. And this data is from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, known as the nation's report card. It's the most consistent and standardized test that this country uses. And the first table there, fourth grade reading for all students, Michigan's scale score is 218. The U.S. average is 220. We rank about 34th. In eighth grade math, the U.S. average is 282, Michigan's is 278, and we rank 36th. Now, some of this, we've known for decades that one of the largest factors for how a student performs on a standardized test is their socioeconomic status. And to recognizing that and controlling for that, I've also provided the fourth grade reading scores only for students who qualify for the National Free and Reduced Lunch Program. And by using that measure, we're basically looking at students who are equally low income across the country, because it's the same standard for all students nationally. And by that measure, the U.S. average is 206. The Michigan scale score was 204, and our ranking is 37th in the country. In eighth grade math, for students who qualify for free and reduced lunches, Michigan's ranking is 47th. And you'll find similar rankings and statistics for fourth grade math and eighth grade reading. I used both of those because those are the two tests that are given every 2 years through the NAEP program. Well, with these statistics and looking at how Michigan compares to the rest of the state, it would seem odd that our schools are in a financial crisis then, if we do a pretty good job of funding them. And the reason for that crisis is, there are many reasons for it. Broadly, the big picture is that we are trying to support and maintain a school system that we built when we were relatively wealthy. We're no longer relatively wealthy. If you look at the state statistics of economic performance in this state over the last decade, we've gone from a relatively wealthy state to a relatively poor state. And we're trying to deal with that and how we fund our different programs, and K-12 is the largest thing that we fund. The other reason, I think, for the fiscal crisis, the perception of the fiscal crisis definitely is the way that, just the timeline of the way schools are funded. When the legislature doesn't set the amount that the foundation allowance is going to provide to schools until September or October, and schools have to set their budget in June, that makes it very difficult for them. I mean, it's common sense. It's hard to set a budget when you're not sure exactly how much money you're going to receive. I've spoken with superintendents and school board members who said, no matter what the funding level is, it would make it a lot easier if we at least knew what we were going to get, because they can plan ahead for those kinds of things and have more flexibility. The other reason for the fiscal crisis is the rising costs of our school systems. And you saw from the first chart, historically, our schools have only become more expensive over time. And one of the fastest growing expenses in our schools is for school employee health insurance. On a per pupil basis, after adjusting for inflation, from 2000 to 2009, the amount we spend on school employee health insurance increased by 56%. That is, in this country, we have a so-called national health care crisis because costs are out of control. Across the nation, it's up by 25%, adjusted for inflation. So in schools, the crisis in health care is almost twice as bad as it is across the country. We now spend about $1,300 per pupil just on providing school employees with health insurance. And the reason for that, I mean, one of the reasons why this is so expensive and is growing more expensive is because schools generally pay more per employee to provide health insurance. We did a survey in 2009 of all the school districts in the state and asked them to give us what they spend on their school health insurance plans and what their employees contribute to those plans. And for health insurance for teachers, for a family plan, the most common plan that's offered through schools, schools were spending about 45% more than the average in the private sector in Michigan, and even larger private sector average nationally. So that's one of the big concerns. Another rising cost within the schools, and this has, school districts really have no control over this, but it's the cost of the pension system. This has increased by 31% from 2000 to 2009 after adjusting for inflation. And when you include other employee taxes that districts have to pay, schools spend about $1,600 per pupil meeting those costs as well. So you've got health care and school employee pensions consuming almost $3,000 per pupil of what we spend on schools. And not surprisingly, when you look at how Michigan ranks across the country and what we spend on school employee benefits, we rank right up there. We're 6th in the country in the percentage of instructional expenditures that go to pay for employee benefits. So with that, I will be happy to take any questions.